came out just a couple days ago. Eric Gronwell has been dealing with some health issues.
Nice job with that name because there's real umlauts in that name. We'll start there. So like not Motley Crue umlauts that were like just thrown on to be decorative and cool. He's actually Swedish. He won the Swedish American Idol, which I get a kick out of. And then he has real umlauts. And would it be Grunwald?
I guess it could be
Don't
Grunwald.
you like the shit out of everything with a couple of umlauts?
I don't.
All right.
Eric Grunwald announced that due to some health issues and continuing to try and focus on his health, he was departing from Skid Row.
Leukemia, unfortunately.
Yes, he did have leukemia. He didn't say specifically that was it now, but I know they canceled some tour dates. There were some COVID potential things going on. And so they had, I think, four or five shows from their beginning of their tour for the new album that came out.
Sure.
The Gang's All Here. And so they canceled those and said they were going to reschedule them. And then this announcement came out that he was departing the band, but that Lzzy Hale from Hailstorm was going to fill in. And to me, I was a little taken aback by that.
Yeah, you did. You were shocked by that news?
I kinda, yeah. I mean, for me, Hailstorm is just kicking ass.
They're beasts.
And, they have a new album out. They announced tour dates. And then all of a sudden they're like kind of putting that on hold and she's going to go out on tour with Skid Row. So from that perspective, I was shocked by that. But I think it's going to be awesome seeing her doing some of the Skid Row tunes. Yeah,
like I thought about doing a What's the Word segment for this. You know what I mean? Because we could have put in and like done it in that approach. But I was hoping to have some more open conversation because we've never really talked about Skid Row. And I wish that Jeff Salisbury, he's not a part of this episode, but he is a Skid Row fanatic. So I'm sure he would have a lot of good input in on his take on this. But, you and I certainly loved Skid Row when they were in their peak. And I'm not saying that we don't love them now, but we fell in love with them for sure then.
Absolutely.
And it was always to me like my take on Skid Row, kind of looking back at it, and led that backstory, is that Sebastian Bach back then was the golden god. Remember how people, especially women, loved him? He was beautiful. He had like the California blonde thing going on. He had a beast of a voice. And if you looked at him outwardly and you saw the videos, he was like the perfect front man.
Yeah.
To me, like he was cut out of AI, to be the front man that like anybody would want him to be. But you didn't see, at least in those days, before the internet and all that kind of stuff, the train wreck
that he is.
Right. And like just, for lack of better words, I only think just the douchey stuff that he just does all the time. And I don't mean that he's a douche, but he does douchey stuff, and that I think back at the time ultimately that, hold on a second, John is giving me a wave.
I have Mr. Salisbury on the line to join us in this conversation.
Yeah, like Skid Row lit him up.
Yeah.
I love this.
What's up, Lou?
We got a call in from the boss to talk about Skid Row.
What's going on?
Dude, we're talking about Skid Row. Did you know that or did John call you?
John called me.
Oh, I love it.
You're saying that you wished I was there.
Yes.
Yeah. You can hear in the background there's work being done still.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah, so
it's not me vacuuming. It's trying to get ready.
All right.
Got it. So we're doing a new segment called Heavy Happenings, and we were having a discussion about, Eric Gronwald from Skid Row announced he was leaving the band and that Lzzy Hale was stepping in to fill in.
Four dates, official dates
but
right now.
then they came out another story the other day that she may extend and do more shows. So, I said, I'm interested to see how she tackles those songs because she's a great singer.
Absolutely.
And so was Eric but Wisk was just talking about Sebastian.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so that's really we're having this big conversation. We've never really talked about Skid Row before, and we were talking about I remember how much you loved Skid Row. We were really talking about those first two albums. And then I was just commenting on how much of a golden god, Sebastian Bach was for those first two albums. But you didn't really kind of know his personality. That was eventually kind of, to me, revealed in time. And now, like kind of looking back on it, the word that I was using was douchey. That like he was certainly capable of doing douchey things, and not to call Sebastian Bach a douche, but he was where I was getting at was the you know, where there was the Raid commercial that was Kills Bugs Dead, and I think this ultimately ended his tenure with Skid Row, where he wore the shirt that said that AIDS, in the height of the AIDS epidemic, AIDS kills fags dead. That's what he wore out in public. And it's kind of like, you're a golden god. You have a beast of a voice. You're in a crazy popular band, you know, and why do you need to wear that shirt?
Right. Well, and to me, there was the incident where somebody threw a bottle at him.
Yes.
He threw the bottle back, ended up hitting somebody else.
Yeah.
Then went in the crowd to try and get at the guy that threw the bottle. And, and that was a huge deal.
Yep.
But it seemed like anytime a microphone was put in front of him by the media, he tended to want to be the guy. It struck me a little bit like David Lee Roth was at the time with Van Halen. And I think some of that is what kind of rubbed the other guys in the band raw to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But then Sebastian was kind of the same way, where he wanted to monopolize the media time and ultimately would say something or do something stupid.
Right.
That they're like, you know what? We're done with this.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think that all that stuff is, I don't know that he's douchey as much as that's who he is. And it's also, it shouldn't be a surprise to them, because he probably was like undiagnosed ADD and, you know, whatever, because we're older. So people with his kind of energy, just, they're like, oh, he's a douche or whatever. But really it's people who just have too much energy and not enough, you know,
self-control.
The self-control, then also maybe the parents let them go, you know, who knows? Like I always likened him to our friend who Kevin probably doesn't really know, and maybe he remembers, but Shmoo.
Oh yeah.
Just like, and Shmoo was like the biggest hearted dude, but he just couldn't help himself because he was just out of control at all times because he was on 11 because of his ADD, but he wasn't douchey. He was actually one of the like nicest people that I know. And we always talk about Porno Dan, same thing. Dan was like always like at 11 and it's their personality. But I think the thing that everybody forgets is like, you're surprised that the singer of a huge metal band is a spaz and like needs attention. And, you know, that's sort of what made him what he was because he needed that attention and that drive. It's like being surprised that Conor McGregor's kind of douchey. He's a fighter, like, you know.
And look, I'm going to say it again. Wow. I'm not calling Sebastian Bach a douche. I'm just saying he did douchey things.
I know.
Another word, I guess, that could be stupid, you know?
I know, but I mean, that thing, it's like you shouldn't be surprised that the lead singer of a huge metal band is doing stupid things, especially back then, because, you know, that shirt wasn't politically correct back then, but it wasn't not politically correct because it was a different time. I mean, it was more accepted, not that it was right, but it was more accepted. And I think that you have to sort of factor that in. It's like you're being surprised that, you know, a snake bit you. A snake is going to be a snake, you know, or they're just being who they are, and it's part of what gets them to where they're at. Like him, Conor McGregor, you know, fighters are fighters. Metalhead guys are, you know, sort of antisocial, like all that sort of stuff. And people that just have that extra gear, like those guys, tend to go over the top, and that's what some people love about them, and that's what some people hate about them. But it shouldn't be surprising to anybody, I don't think.
I think, though, that ultimately, though, like where I go with Skid Row is that we've always loved the band. And, you know, I know the three of us have always loved the band. And I think that other people out there obviously love Skid Row. I mean, those first two albums and then, you know, even subsequent music were really strong.
Yep.
And they never recovered from the Sebastian Bach. You know, like I have a list of people that sang with them. It's not just even about Eric Grunwald with the umlauts.
Right.
You know, so like it would be nice for them to find some grounding and consistency. And however, with a new lead singer, or, you know, out of all of this, you know, out of all this attention, I'm sure you're getting to it, Sebastian Bach wants to return to Skid Row.
He does. He's been very vocal on that. And I think it just, you know, in this day and age where we see, you know, not all of them, you know, the rumored reunions, but certainly where you got one guy who is saying, hey, now you don't have a singer and I'd love to come back, but the divide and the scars that he's created with those guys that they're not even thinking once about bringing him back.
Right.
I mean, kind of shows, there's probably no amount of money that makes the original band reuniting going to happen.
Right.
Well, I mean, those things can be true. Like he's burned the bridges, so they didn't want him back, but that also doesn't mean that he's replaceable, because there's certain people that I think are irreplaceable. Like there's plenty of great singers, but there's not plenty of Sebastian Bach. Just like, and also his chemistry with the band, because at that time, Rachel and Dave and all those guys were also hellions too. Maybe not as much of a hellion as he was, but it was tolerable until it wasn't. And same thing. It's like saying, oh well, Alice in Chains, you can just replace Lane. It's been shown. I mean, as great as the singer is,
William Duvall.
Now I forget his name. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's a great singer, and he does a great job with this stuff. But he's not Lane.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the same thing with Sebastian. Is like you can have people who may even be a better singer, may be in tune better, may but they're not Sebastian. They don't have the attitude. They don't have the growl. They don't have whatever. And also sometimes it's like the connection, or even like when people get older, like James Hetfield doesn't have the same sound that he had when he was in his 20s and he was angry and drunk.
Sure.
True.
So
I think like
they might be searching for something they're never going to get. Even with Sebastian.
Sure. Well, and like in that vein, I think that's where we're getting at with this conversation in terms of rooting for Lzzy Hale, because Kevin and I were talking about how much fans we are of Hailstorm and Lzzy Hale. I mean, I think Lzzy Hale's such a great student of rock and roll. Like she seems to know everything about hard rock and metal. It's amazing. Like, whenever she's hosting a show, that's a talk show, or she's hosting, there's video shows that you see on her, with TV, and she is well-spoken on everything. But I love the quote. I think it hits at the heart at what we're rooting for with the kids, Skid Row. And I have notes, Kevin. Did you notice that?
I see that.
I have notes today because I want to get Lzzy right. Yeah. Said, I started listening to Skid Row when I was a teenager growing up on the East Coast in central Pennsylvania. They were one of the only bands at that time that truly bridged the gap for my love of 80s big choruses and riffs, but had the same poignant dirt and grime that was seeping into my cracks of my mind during the 90s. I love you guys. There'll be blood left on the stage. That's the spirit you want.
Yeah.
And looking at like the list of singers that attempted to fill in after Sebastian Bach, that debacle happened, because they couldn't get that together. That's, to me, is the best thing I've heard of for Skid Row in any of the news since the early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's also the point that just because she replaces him and she's never going to catch that lightning in a bottle that he had doesn't mean they can't be good, because it's very rare. But, I mean, Van Halen did it with David Lee Roth and then Van Hagar, two very different sounds, but it worked. And then,
AC/DC?
Look at Kevin. Yeah, I mean, AC/DC is probably the best example. But, Kevin's boy, Ronnie James Dio and Sabbath,
Yep. Yeah.
Like sometimes it works. It's just different.
Yeah.
And that might be what you'd have to look forward to with her. Is like, it's going to be great, but it's going to be different. It's never going to be old Skid Row. And it probably won't ever be old Skid Row even if Sebastian were to come back.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and she's got a ton of energy and she's got a great voice, but it's a different kind of style that she usually brings to the table. Yeah. So I think it'll, like you said, it's going to be interesting and it's definitely going to be different, but
that's more like the AC/DC comparison. AC/DC where they're similar but different, whereas Van Hagar and Van Halen were very different. But Ronnie James Dio and Ozzy were similar but different. So maybe she's going to be closer to the Van Hagar Van Halen. Maybe she's going to be closer to the the AC/DC where they have a very similar sound but distinct.
Right. Well, I mean, and I go back also to the documentary, that great documentary we watched last year, the I Wanna Rock. I think it's still on Paramount Plus.
Yep.
And it was, about that time period, and Jake Sabo Jake the Snake, really spoke to that time period and, the difficulty of the 90s and when that happened, when Sebastian left and how they've been trying, and his struggles with Sebastian Bach. He really was vocal about that. And even taking him on in the first place, like he was hesitant to begin with Sebastian Bach, which was very revealing,
right?
With that conversation.
Yeah.
But either way, like I feel like I remember an interview with Anthrax, and Scott Ian was praising Skid Row, which was a surprise to me because I go back to the Sebastian being the golden god, and there was a lot of shots from thrash metal bands at hair bands and glam bands at the time, and that was not the case with Skid Row. There was an acceptance there, and I agree with the Lzzy Hale quote. There is something grittier and grimier about their sound and their music, and it's not, to me, glam metal.
Well, the second album was complete divert. It was a left turn, from what they were, and much heavier. I mean, they took Pantera out on the road with them. Right. That was the first time I saw Pantera, and they smoked Skid Row, but it made sense based on that second album and Pantera releasing their second album. Pantera's a little heavier, but it made sense.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Well, thank you, Lou, for calling in on this one, because it's hard to have a heavy metal happening with someone I know that usually is chiming in on the show that I know would have loved that topic. Was I right?
Yep.
All right.
You definitely were. Unfortunately, work calls. So
I get it. I remember you were like Skid Row and Saigon Kick were probably neck and neck for you in like 90, 91.
Oh, yeah. And Badlands.
Yes, Badlands also. Yes.
Yeah.
Saigon Kick announced they're doing some shows together.
Yeah. I saw
coming up.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to see about the Salisbury Center. For that.
Absolutely.
That's a kick for me that I don't care if I lose money.
I love it. It's
awesome.
It's a big fancy concert ticket for you then at that point.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm paying for the backstage passes.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right,
cool.
brother.
All right, guys. Appreciate it.
We love you.
See you soon.
See you.